You know the creation story in Genesis 1? It's probably one of the most familiar texts out there for many
So it
people.
really is. Heard countless times, often from a very young age.
Yeah, exactly. But what if we could just sort of hit pause on all that familiarity, try and explore it like we're hearing it for the very first time?
That's the challenge, isn't it? To look past our usual lenses and really ask, what might these ancient words have originally meant?
Right. Because this deep dive, it isn't about, wading into the science versus religion debate with Genesis 1, or just labeling it as another old myth.
No, the focus is different.
Our mission today is really to understand it in its original historical world, specifically the Babylonian exile.
And putting it there in that context is absolutely crucial. The people who first heard or read this, they were dealing with immense trauma, loss, displacement.
Which leads to the really interesting part. Could those lines we know so well, the 7 days, or that phrase, there was evening and there was morning, could they actually hold different meanings we've mostly missed?
Meanings that would have resonated deeply with that specific audience, perhaps.
Exactly. What were the authors trying to say to them in their situation?
Yeah.
Especially about things like, human dignity.
Yeah.
And freedom.
That's the core question we want to explore.
Okay, so let's ground ourselves.
Yeah.
The Bible, Genesis included, it didn't just appear out of thin air, did it?
Not at all. It came out of very real, very human historical situations. And for Genesis 1, that situation, the defining one, is the Babylonian exile. These words were shaped by what people were living through, their fears, their hopes.
And it's not like a direct recording from the sky, is it? There's this idea of divine inspiration, but it works through human authors.
That's the understanding, yes. You have human beings, individuals rooted in their time and culture, recording what they perceive as divine messages. So their language, their concepts, they're naturally influenced by the world around them.
Okay. So to really get the essence of Genesis 1, we have to think about that history, that audience, and what the author likely intended for them.
Absolutely. And it's really important to see that Genesis 1 is offering something distinct. It's pushing back against the dominant creation stories of the time, specifically the Babylonian ones.
How so? What was the big difference there?
Well, put simply, many Babylonian myths presented humans as being created basically to be servants, to do the hard labor for the gods. It's kind of a low view of humanity's purpose.
Doesn't sound very uplifting, no.
Not really. And Genesis, it comes in with this stark contrast. Right from the start, it proclaims the incredible inherent value of human beings. That was a radical idea compared to those other narratives.
It really does make you pause and think about all the modern debates, evolution versus creationism and all that. Maybe we're arguing about the wrong things, missing the original point.
I think that often happens, yes. Those debates have their own history, but they tend to bypass the text's primary aim, which wasn't, to be a scientific textbook in our 21st century sense.
Okay, so if it's not science reporting, what is it? What kind of literature is Genesis 1?
It's generally understood best as wisdom literature. Think of it as exploring fundamental truths. Truths about the world, about our existence, about how we should relate to each other and to the divine. It's about conveying deep principles.
So the ancient focus was more on the wisdom, the meaning, rather than, say, factual accuracy as we'd measure it today.
Exactly. The value was in the insights it offered, the understanding of life and the cosmos it provided.
Okay, wisdom literature. That's a helpful frame. Let's look at some specific parts. Creation by word, God just speaks, and things happen. What's going on there?
Well, in the ancient Near East, a king's command had real power, right? His word established law, initiated action. It shaped reality within his kingdom.
Okay, I can see that. Authority.
Right. So the idea of God creating simply by speaking taps into that cultural understanding. It emphasizes God's ultimate authority, the power to establish order, to set the fundamental principles of existence just by declaring them.
God's word itself structures reality.
That's the idea. And interestingly, some people find resonances, maybe not direct links, but resonances with concepts in modern physics, like the idea that consciousness or observation might play a role in how matter behaves. It's a thought-provoking parallel anyway.
That is fascinating. Okay, what about the 7 days and the Sabbath? Why that structure?
The rhythm of the moon, the lunar cycle, might be part of the background for a 7-day structure, but the real punchline, the emphasis is clearly on day 7, the Sabbath, the day of rest.
And why was that so important, especially for the exiles?
Just imagine, you're likely subjected to forced, relentless labor in Babylon, no days off, just grinding work. Then you hear a story where the creator god, after shaking the entire cosmos, rests.
Ah, so even God rested.
Exactly. It sends this incredibly powerful message. Rest isn't weakness. It isn't laziness. It's actually built into the very fabric of creation. It's fundamental, even divine.
Wow. For people being worked to the bone, that must have been, well, revolutionary seemed like the right word.
It really was. It elevates rest to essentially a human right, a sign of dignity. The Sabbath becomes this radical protest against the dehumanizing system of forced labor they were experiencing. It's a statement that you are more than just your labor.
That changes everything about how I've heard the Sabbath discussed. Okay, how about this phrase? There was evening and there was morning.
Yeah.
It always just seemed like, marking time.
It's easy to just read past it. But again, think about the lived experience of someone enslaved or doing forced labor. What was daytime?
Grueling work, hardship.
Right. And evening. Evening brought relief. The end of the toil, maybe some rest, some recovery.
So the day starts not with the dread of morning labor, but with the relief of evening.
That seems to be the implication. By framing the day as starting with evening, the narrative prioritizes rest, recovery, maybe even hope for the next day, before the labor begins again. It's a very subtle but deeply human-centered way of structuring time, especially in those circumstances.
That's incredibly insightful. Okay, another one. And God saw that it was good. Seems simple enough. God's pleased with the work.
It's more than just, yep, looks good. Think of it as God intentionally, carefully preparing the absolute best environment. Why? For humanity. For the pinnacle of creation that's coming. The ones who will bear God's image.
Like setting up a perfect nursery.
That's a great analogy. Like a mother bird meticulously lining the nest, making it just right. Every good thing, the light, the water, the plants, the animal, it's all being put in place for the benefit of humanity.
So it's less about self-praise and more a statement of provision. Like, look at all this good stuff I've made ready for you.
Precisely. It's a declaration of care, of intention, focused on the eventual arrival of humankind.
Which brings us right to that climax.
Yeah.
Humanity made in God's image. Why was that such a bombshell in that specific historical moment?
Because you're talking about a world deeply structured by hierarchy. Kings might be seen as images of gods, maybe nobles, but slaves. Conquered peoples, definitely not.
Right, society was rigidly layered.
Absolutely. So to declare that all humans, implicitly, men and women, Jew and Babylonian, free and enslaved, are made in the divine image, possessing inherent worth and dignity derived directly from the Creator, that is profoundly radical. It shatters those hierarchies.
It completely flips the script on who has value.
It does, and it reverses that common ancient idea that humans exist to serve the gods. No, this presents a God who, almost like a parent, pours out creative energy for the sake of humanity. Think about how that message of inherent worth would land for people treated as less than human.
A God who exists for humanity, especially hearing that while in exile, in despair. That's powerful. It really does sound like this creation story, which we often treat in other ways, was fundamentally a message of hope and value for them.
I believe that's the core of it, yes. It wasn't just an origin myth. It was potent wisdom literature, crafted to instill a sense of profound dignity, the right to rest, and ultimately a vision of liberation in a people who desperately needed it.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the big takeaway really is that Genesis 1, read through the lens of the exile, isn't primarily about how the world was made in a scientific sense. It's about who we are and why we matter. It's about dignity, rest, and hope. Timeless wisdom, not just an old story.
Exactly. And maybe it leaves us with thought to ponder. If the story depicts a creator meticulously preparing a good world for humanity's flourishing, what kind of responsibility or maybe what different appreciation does that inspire in us when we look at our environment, the natural world around us today?
That's a very powerful question to carry forward. Thank you so much for walking us through this. It's always amazing how much depth can be found when you look again at something familiar. Really looking forward to our next deep dive.